And I can tell you, as someone who um, has fought for civil rights and democracy my entire life, I think now more than ever, we need a conference like this. I don't have to tell you the role of leaders in cities like Los Angeles, which are global cities, and Mexico City. It's important for us to stand up for the notion that democracy isn't perfect. In fact, it could get complicated, but it's the best system of government that we've come up with. And from my vantage point, modern direct democracy, where the people are participating, is absolutely critical. And I think it's important that we're holding this session here in the INE, because all throughout Mexico, hundreds of thousands and even millions of people are concerned with what's happening with the INE currently. Not only the United States of America, but Europe and many freedom-loving people understand that it's important to have an organization that's making sure that our elections are clean, that they're fair, that people are participating in a way that makes our democracy thrive. So I wanted to come today to participate. I've been here over the last few days because it's very, very important that people like yourselves that work with civic organizations that are trying to keep our democracy alive, that we speak out against the assault on democracy all around the world. I don't have to tell you what's happening in Hungary or the Philippines or Brazil, or what's happening in Brazil and even here in Mexico, and frankly, even in the United States.
Need to work or need to be equipped in order to facilitate direct democracy. That's the issue of this panel this morning. We were talking a lot about numbers this week, about quantities, about money, about staff, but also about qualities, about what electoral bodies can provide, how they can help, and also, and last but not least, about capacities, about very often not very frequently used, and people participate. So the question is really, what can electoral bodies do in order to help, to support, to assist in this process? And I would like to start with Claudia on that.
Buenos días. Muchas gracias, Bruno. Para mí es un placer recibirlos aquí en el Instituto Nacional Electoral. Estar con Ana Rabel, muchas gracias, Ana, con Jorge Enrique, con Néstor y con mi querida amiga Erika, compañeros todos de la función, y por supuesto con Bruno. Gracias, Bruno, incansable luchador y promotor de estos encuentros.
During all these days when we have had all our meetings, I believe we can we can be sure about the premise which has to do with the threats against democracy. There are threats against democracy not only in Mexico, maybe in recent times we've seen this more frequently, but it is happening in every country of the world. We see these alerts, we see these actual alerts and threats against the democratic systems. And what I believe is that in this learning or teaching or pedagogy about rights, what we need to do, because I believe there is a lack of clarity. What is democracy? We do not know. We do not clearly know what is democracy. And people think in terms of the lack of results by governments. They relate this to the democratic regime. And there, as electoral authorities and as electoral bodies, we need to work a lot because this incorrect perception has been pointed out by people. It has been said that democracy is not that useful and that it can be replaced by vertical regimes. For us to be able to perform our work, the work that is recognized in the laws in order to apply citizens' participation mechanisms, we need to take one step back. First, we need to establish a pedagogic strategy, regardless of the context or depending on the context that prevails in each country, to be aware of what is and what is not democracy. We need to be aware of what is democracy good for and what democracy is not good for. What is the scope of democracy? And above all, we need to be able to tell which are the limits of democracy. In both cases, representative and direct democracies. Democracy is not a mobile app that can be multi-powerful. It's not going to be capable of resolving everything. And this is something we need to all clearly be able to tell. Those who live in a society should know this. Democracy is how we are organized. It is how we have a government. It is going to be the mechanism that is going to take us to the collective decision-making process. And I believe we need to insist as institutions. The very first step is to produce this pedagogy and this teaching and this information about rights, and we should all be aware. We should all know what is our role in democracy and as citizens. And as female and male citizens, what is democracy expecting from us? You can I would like you to pay attention to this. Those at the federal level, at the national level, we have had the inclusion and the incorporation of direct democracy mechanisms. And whereas I am speaking about mechanisms that belong to us, to the citizenship, to us, to citizens. But unfortunately, our first exercises were on the opposite side compared to what we were expecting. It is not possible to say that one mechanism, such as mandate revocation or recall, we cannot say that a design that empowers citizens to tell citizens, I first elected you and then we want you to be removed. How come it is now being promoted by government? That belongs to us. That right belongs to us, to citizens. And this is how we started this exercise in Mexico at the federal level. And how come today in a law, how come they can concentrate like if Mexico were only one territory without differences in the different states? How come they want only one authority? How come they are pretending? And the law is not clear, by the way. How come only one authority is going to be in charge of what needs to be done at the level of Mexico, at the level of each one of the electoral institutes, at the level of what all these electoral institutes do? So, at the legislative branch, it hasn't been understood that direct democracy is democracy that belongs to the people. And if government intervenes and then it is going to be turned into a placebo for government because it doesn't belong to government. We have to encourage participation. And my suggestion, my proposal is to let's bring this knowledge about rights, this pedagogy or education on rights so that citizens can take ownership over those rights. And this is when we are going to improve to have further and better participation in Mexico as well. And this is something we've seen at the federal level. And please, Bruno, you tell me when my time is over. And this is something we have lived at the federal level. And we have also seen this in each one of the different states. It is said that the mechanism exists. It is said that the authority, that the independent authority of governments exists as expected for organizational purposes, but no resources are allocated. And without resources, then how are we going to be able to strengthen that side and that part that has to do with the citizens' rights? This is the end of my first intervention. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Entendí por completo que tienes muchas
More
preguntas.
than maybe solutions because of this very special situation you are into. So from Mexico we go to Paraguay to Jorge George from the electoral body in Paraguay. We have heard and learned a lot, of course, about the INE here this week. We don't know so much about your institution, so you may share a few basic information about also your electoral management body, so we understand better also the role, and of course also how you as an electoral tribunal can contribute to the participation of people. So your floor. Thank you. You can go there. I will give you a sign when there are 30 seconds left. Okay. Yes, it's about after 4 minutes.
Habría que bajar el micrófono, por favor. First, I would like to thank INE, the National Electoral Institute, for this invitation to participate in this event. And I bring solidarity of the people from Paraguay, specifically from the Electoral Superior Tribunal of Paraguay, and since this conflict. We wish this conflict is resolved institutionally and always strengthening democracy in Mexico. Nosotros nos avisaron también que Rick de los Estados Unidos está enfermo, por eso le mandamos saludos a Rick y que deseamos que se recupere. Lo necesitamos. This question is very important for us in Paraguay. These days, we're going to have the exit, the departure, the end of one of the longest dictatorships and pretty bloody dictatorships in the continent after 34 years. And we are fighting, as our Mexican colleague said. We're fighting together against all those forces. We are fighting all those threats that happen against democracy in all our countries. Today, we can state that direct democracy mechanisms represent a very important phenomenon, and they help representative modern democracy. And there is a theory that states that all these institutions have emerged as a consequence of a criticism against the inherent deficiencies against the representative government, and today this is being seen as a tool that will enrich the processes, the democratic processes. And it is the periodic election system and the role of the legislative bodies are complemented, and this is why in our democracies we have these mechanisms that allow for a direct exercise of democracy, because it is possible to eliminate the intermediation between the subject matter and the individuals and the governors, those who are in government, because through the vote people can decide to accept, to reject, and to propose depending on their own will and their own thinking process. So we can understand that direct democracy as a set of mechanisms that would allow citizens to decide on specific matters, and they can do so by casting a vote. So we need to encourage the collective participation and direct participation in the decision-making process, not only in the election of representatives. Direct democracy mechanisms represent, I will repeat, something that will help representative modern democracy. In the case of Paraguay, the first electoral code in the law of 1990, it included referendum and people's initiative. These are two concepts, two very important institutions. And then these concepts were incorporated into the Constitution. And today we are ruled by a Constitution that has been enacted, that was enacted in 1992. And the idea, the aim of this Constitution was to characterize our democracy as representative, but also as participative and pluralist according to Chapter 1 of the Constitution. It reads that the first standard states, the Republic of Paraguay adopts for its government representative, participative, and pluralist democracy based on the recognition of human dignity. The Constitution recognizes as a competence the electoral justice, all those aspects that derive from every type of people's consultation. As a consequence of this, the law that rules electoral justice in the law, the electoral tribunal is in charge of directing, leading, and supervising people's consultations and to come to a successful end, completion. So here we are speaking about two institutions, referendum and the People's Initiative. These are two concepts which are constitutionally in the Constitution. Referendum, this is an election through which the electoral body of a country or a region will express its will with respect to a decision by the legal representatives. This has been submitted to consultation. We normally answer with a yes or with a no. To answer a question is asked by the electoral body. It can be binding or it can be just for consultative purposes. In other words, non-mandatory. The laws in the Constitution and the laws that are the standard do not clearly specify when the referendum is going to be used. The law is clear when it states that it is not possible to subject treaties, international relationships, international agreements, and expropriations, and national defense, limit of the real property, and tax topics, elections, national elections, provincial elections, and municipal elections are not subject to referendum. Yes, ya. ¿Cuántos minutos? How many more minutes? Ya se le acabó el tiempo, señor. Que está pidiendo 2 o 3 minutos más. He's asking for 2 or 3 more minutes. Luego tenemos the recognition of right to people's initiative to propose legislative bills. Specifically and in concrete terms, we have some problems that result from the budgetary limitations to do referendum. It has been used only once, and we are also working to make to expedite people's consultations. The constant of the institution that I am in charge of leading today, the one that I chair, is to fulfill its institutional aim regardless of the situation. We know that we need to offer continuity to citizens' participation. And I would like to end by saying the following. Democracy in Paraguay has been represented blood, sweating, tears, and deaths of lots of our nationals. We want to become the necessary ones in this fight. The nation we dream of, we don't want to have prosecuted children in our countries. This is our aim, and this will be possible if we strengthen democracy and if we strengthen rule of law. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias.
Yes, and sorry for the short time. It's always a challenge in this kind of panels. We are traveling from the south to the north to the United States. And Ravel, when we are hearing about the Federal Election Commission, we feel that that must be a building which is 10 times as big as this one, but I know it isn't. I have visited the building, so share with you your thoughts about that.
Gracias a todos y todas por estar aquí con nosotros. Y yo también quiero decir por un momento cómo INE es tan importante no solamente en México, pero también en el mundo entero, porque ellos hacen mucho para la democracia que es importante.
Which is important, and the court. And this is why the attacks against INE, and this is why it is similar to what is happening as we speak today in the United States, more or less similar to what we see in the United States. Now I will switch into English. I apologize. Me disculpo con ustedes. I apologize to those who are Spanish-speaking people. En los Estados Unidos hay dos autoridades
electoral authorities. There are secretaries of state and local registrars who do the work of the elections, and the secretaries of state are elected officials. And then there is the groups that do what the Federal Election Commission does, which is to provide transparency of who's paying for the elections, who's paying the candidates, and to ensure that the regulations regarding the electoral process in mostly having electoral authorities must take their work in large part to assure that there is trust in the electoral authorities and the technology. And because they have to make sure, and I think that in both areas, having transparency to the public is really important, and particularly with the questions about the process and electoral machines. So what they should do is make clear how that technology came about, whether it can be audited, how it's used in voting process, as well as the counting process, and how the results are tabulated, and how the information goes from one place to another and is secure. And because of this, which has not happened publicly enough, there's also a good, and I have done this before in Mexico and in Brazil and in other countries throughout Latin America, it's important also to have election observers who can look at the process and make sure that it's absolutely safe. And ultimately, at the end of the election, there should be an ability to audit the results and have transparency in the way that the machines, uh-oh. Did I already break it? Not me. Okay. So, because politics is, okay, viene otro. Ah, aquí está. Okay. So all of these things should be communicated to the public so that they actually know about this before the voting process begins and all the way to the end. And I have an example of this that I think is really important. In the south of Brazil, I was there observing an election which was done at the subnational level for a mayoral race. And what the electoral judges did prior to the election, they went to all the schools in this town. It was a small town, relatively. Went to all the schools, talked to the school children about the mayoral election coming up. 30 seconds? Oh my God, this is such a good story, I have to tell it. Yeah. Okay, and, and the kids voted for who they wanted for mayor on paper ballots. And then, the day before the election, they set up an electoral process where the children came and voted on the machines. And there was press from Sao Paulo, from all over Brazil, observing this. And they also had a group of lawyer auditors from a neighboring town to come and take a look at what the audit, about whether it was fair and free. And in fact, the children voted with their papers. The machines were 99% exactly the same. And since this was covered throughout Brazil, and Bolsonaro had been saying, oh, the machines are a fraud, the people in that town where in Brazil and many other countries, you have to go to vote, but you can annul the vote if you want. There were no votes annulled. Everybody trusted the electoral process and therefore went forward and voted the next day in that community.
Thank you very much. There is always time for a good story. We have been to United States, now you talked about Brazil. Let's go to Panama. Nestor.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias por la invitación, Bruno. Gracias al panel.
No, thanks to this panelist and the panel. It is my honor to be here in Mexico City. And before I start, I would like to honor one person who is with me today, Justice Second Justice Vice Chair of the Panama Electoral Tribunal, Licenciado Luis Guerra Morales, who is here with us. And now, when I was asked the question about the role of electoral bodies in the direct democracy mechanisms, I did a reflection. I did many very deep reflections. I thought by Nolan Resovsky, and the question is, why do we hold elections? And he even says that elections are the second choice we have as citizens, because the very first choice cannot be used by us, which is to do whatever we feel like we want to do. It is not possible. Order is needed. We cannot do whatever we feel like we would like to do. But in the specific, speaking about the specific role of the electoral tribunal, I should say that going beyond elections, because elections are included in the law, in the constitutions, and the very first day, someone said in the panel spoke about the referendum we had in Panama in the year 2006 about the expansion of the channel. We asked people from Panama they wanted or not the expansion of the channel, and a favorable result was obtained, and the canal was expanded. This is a legal process, the constitutional process, and this is what is normal, and it was the expected process for the Panama Canal. And it was added as one chapter in the reform of 1992 or 1993 in the Constitution. But I should also say that the Panama's electoral tribunal is different from some other tribunals. Is different from other tribunals because it goes beyond. The Panama's electoral tribunal has institutionalized by this. I mean, it is in its legal regulation, the Electoral Reform Commission. I will tell you a very short story. The National Commission of Electoral Reforms, it is a college entity where we have the participation of political parties, where we have members of the organized civil society, and this is whenever a legislative bill is going to be made, an amendment to the electoral law. It happens every 5 years. In other words, in every election process we have in Panama, we have a new electoral law. And in this new electoral law, we first analyze the negative aspects of the previous election process, and then we improve, and then we have it in the new law, in the new electoral law. This is a pretty participative model, because in this way it is possible to have legitimate proposals submitted by the electoral tribunal, and it is legitimate to the eyes of the public opinion and to the citizens, and also to the National Assembly of Deputies. Why them? Because they are the ones passing the laws. And the electoral reforms may not be passed completely, fully, as submitted by the Commission, but there is a 70 or 80% of endorsement by the National Assembly. And this is why we can consider it as a direct democracy mechanism offered by the Electoral Tribunal to the political players in order to improve the processes. And I believe this is something very, very important, and it has been done since 1993 till now. And based on the general elections of the year 2017, when there was an electoral reform, the Electoral Tribunal now has the obligation to propose we want propaganda, and then to give rise to a discussion of programs and actions that will resolve national programs in the social media and in internet. And I would like to specifically underline this, because I am in charge of the social media, the Electoral Tribunal Monitoring Center, and the digital studies at the Electoral Tribunal. And we see how in direct participation and direct democracy, we had an initiative, a pact. It came from the Electoral Tribunal, but it was given to the hands of the citizens, and we want the Panamanian citizens, the ones who promote the good use of the social media. And I believe it is not necessary to speak about what is happening in that digital environment, in that digital society that is becoming, and the reason why the society is sometimes confused. So that's it in terms of my first presentation. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Y es muy interesante.
Clause in your electoral law, which invites everybody to constantly look into how the work of the election bodies are working. I think that's fascinating. And this dynamics around election bodies, that's something we have been very impressed about here in Mexico these days. And Erika, from the Mexican city ECM perspective, what are your main thoughts about this role?
Hola, hola, buenos días a todas y todos. Un placer recibirlos en la Ciudad de México. Saludo con mucho cariño a Néstor, mi querida amiga.
Nestor, my dear friend Claudia, Bruno, Jorge, it is my pleasure to share this panel with you. And despite of the fact Joe said not to thanks, but I have to do it because it is early Saturday. You are taking this time to speak about direct democracy. It's the fourth day of the forum. We've listened to many things, and it helps once you have heard all the things that have been said. But there is also a point in time when we are going to say, what am I going to be doing next? How can I work at the local level? Here in Mexico City, for example, in this great country such as Mexico, you know that it is almost 120 million inhabitants. And in Mexico City, we're speaking about a population that sleeps over what the population that always sleeps in Mexico City, 8 million people. But in transit or commuting, we have more or less 25 million people commuting to and from Mexico City. And this is exactly where we can see how, and as Claudia said, how at the national level there are direct democracy mechanisms that we can say are young people, or no, young exercises implemented a few years ago when the first consultation processes started. But it's been more than 20 years. It was in 1993 the first time. This is when we started to see the first exercises, the very first plebiscite, and we've been doing constant exercises in direct democracy. In Mexico City, it is difficult to tell what happens, what are we missing, why is it that we are not talking to citizens, why don't they fall in love with these mechanisms which are not only representative democracy, what we see every 4, every 6, every 8 years, depending on the legal model we have. I believe there is a multifaceted problem, as many people have said. I agree in some of the very important points that have to do with this civic education, what we need to keep reinforcing since childhood, and then with youth, because we should not have this dreaming idea that once you turn an adult, we will automatically become a democratic person. It is like touching people and then say, look, now I like democracy as of today. And I believe this is the solution to life. I believe we need to be very autocritical. We need to go back to the basic elements that have to do with this education. They have to do with childhood plans that have to do with civic education, and we have to repeat these plans once and again and again. many times, and when we go to schools, when we go to the field, it is amazing to see how children, how they raise their hands, and they want to answer. They are asking for questions. They say, I want to participate, I have an idea. But then there's disappointment, unenchantment, disappointment with respect to democracy, because I believe a lot of weight is given to democracy, and we believe that it is the formula that will solve every problem, that this is a way to solve social inequalities, economic inequalities, and all the problems of a country. To me, this is not the only solution, but it could be a pretty assertive way of resolving. This is why we need to continue. We need to continue in this journey, in this pathway, and something that Claudia said, and I will be putting her on the spot, because yesterday I was talking to an academician, and we were trying to rebounce ideas to then come and talk to you today, and he told me, what are you missing? What are you missing at the Electoral Institute of Mexico City? What do you need so that you can exceed the levels of participation you have in your citizens' participation mechanisms? And I did just what Claudia did. Money. I need more money in order to do it better. In budgetary terms, we are in a very complex model where the electoral authorities in Mexico City, unfortunately, is a critical example where we have had a less budget. And then my colleague told me, well, what about the past when you didn't have these money problems? Why are you still having the same participation percentages? Why can you exceed 4 or 5% of your listing when speaking about participative budgeting? Why all those initiatives that have to do with very clear problems that affect a specific group of the population? Why are those mechanisms the ones activated? And then we thought about a consultation of 2015 in the Chapultepec corridor, or more recently where the surroundings of the Aztec Stadium is going to be modified to have a development. Why is it only when people are being affected? So yes, it is true. It is not only a matter of budget. It is not a matter of budget. Budget is necessary. Yes, to be honest with you, it is necessary to have money to perform the activities, to improve credibility, and that this is it, Bruno. I will be sharing some data, and as Anne said, I will be sharing some numbers. And recently there was a national survey organized by INEGI on civic education together with INE, and there is some speaking information. What is the community's participation? Only 19% of the population over 15 years of age said they have done community work in the last 12 months. Only 22% has performed activities related to public matters also in the last 12 years, and 56% of the population says that they know a type of citizens participation, but only 15% of the people has get involved in a type of citizens participation mechanism. This is pretty revealing information, and it is useful information for us as electoral authorities to be to criticize ourselves. We need to have more education. We need autonomous electoral bodies, and we also need to have this budgetary independence so that we can keep working with this and in these democratic mechanisms. Thanks, Bruno. Muchas gracias. Estamos hablando de mensajes sumamente claros.
As I said before, there's always time for a good story. There's always time for interesting numbers. But our time is limited, and for this reason, I would like now to go directly to the question time. First, if there is a question here on the panel to one of the other panelists, please come forward. If you have to reflect a little bit first, I have a question to Anne. And my question to you is, you told us about the direct election of the Secretary of States. This has been here in this country also by the government ideas to have elections of, for instance, councillors of the INE. What do you think about this directly election of leading election management responsibles?
I can speak loudly enough.
No, we have translation.
Oh, translation, yeah. Of course. I think it's somewhat problematic to have direct elections of secretaries of state, and the reason for that is that many of them are from one political party or another, and that has created, not in California, But in many places, that has created a problem. It created a huge problem in the South. There is an enormous amount of states throughout the country who are making laws that make it more difficult for people to vote, in particular, blacks, Black Americans, Latino Americans, and young people. So that's because they are aligned with the Republican Party, and that's what they're doing. So I think electing them may not be the best way, honestly. It's better to have people who are public servants to be occupying that role, who see that the issue is we have to get as many people to vote as possible. We want as much participation as possible. We want to make it easy for people to vote, not difficult, and we want to have them understand what the issues are.
Thank you. Do you have a question to one of the panelists?
I just want to say how great it is that everybody here is thanking INE and the electoral authorities in Mexico, because, and I know my issue often as being the Day of the Women, that the wonderful work that they've done for parity in Mexico is very unusual throughout the world. And that's not a question, obviously, but I really, for those of you who have participated in this and know this, I think this is an amazing advance throughout the world.
Thank you. I think this is worth an applaud. Yes. Any question to each another? You, somebody?
A ver, yo quiero preguntar,
I would like to ask about participation indices, rates of participation with the countries which are here with us, because in Mexico at the national level, low rates of participation, because we're speaking about recent exercises, and citizens were not used to that. But in the States, we have a different X-ray, but also we have participation rates are not high. Ernesto and Jorge, would you please speak about direct democracy exercises? And what can you speak about the strategies to increase the participation?
Sí, agradezco la pregunta, y el único caso que tuvimos de referéndum para permitir la votación de compatriotas que viven
Vote for people, nationals living abroad in the year 2011, lower participation, around 12%, and then participation improves in the people's initiatives because there was lots of bureaucracy. And today we are unbureaucratizing those processes, because now we have the digital signatures online, holographic signature to prove the identity of people. It was very difficult. The participation is increasing in people's initiatives. We're working a lot in the awareness of our nationals, thinking in terms of their freedom of consciousness. And in the election processes in general, participation is around 60% in average. But our objective for the next elections, the general elections, on April the 30th, we want to reach 70% participation rate, which would be a record participation in our country. We are working our best. We are doing inclusive policies, training. We want to talk to all the citizens, not only on how to use the machine, but also on how to choose. That is the aim. Thank you very much. I should say that the last plebiscite exercise in Panama, speaking about direct democracy, which was the referendum to expand the Panama Canal. There was an abstention rate of 57% of citizens. Abstention is more than 50% didn't vote. The reason doesn't matter, but in the electoral processes, and by the way, in Panama, we have only one every 5 years where we're going to elect every position. President, Congress, people, only one chamber, and the councilors and the mayors. And in these cases, our participation rate is pretty high. It is around 80 and 90 something percent of participation, despite of the fact that voting is not mandatory. Casting a vote is not mandatory. It is not a democratic celebration, and it is not that people are anxious to participate. Panama has a political system, a highly clientele-based system, and this is maybe why citizens cast a vote, waiting for something in exchange. And this is where the electoral bodies should emphasize even more. We need to emphasize this conscious vote. We don't want the vote to depend on something, to be conditioned by something. We want it to be in favor of a better political system, in favor of a better city. And now speaking about the Commission of Electoral Reforms. And it is great to have the possibility to meet every 5 years to discuss the electoral law, to improve it for the next electoral process. There are some contrasts, there are some pros and cons. In this case, cons. For example, the lack of clear objectives in the case of the electoral reform. It is only at the very short term. It is the analysis of the electoral law based on the things we didn't like. This is based on a very short time scope horizon, and then to make it better for the next election. Everything is based on a very short-term horizon, and this is something I do not like that much. And I will now quote Roland. And this is something normal. I know this is perfectly normal. For example, when a large political party is looking at representation in government, a political representation for them, and a small political parties look for fair representation. In other words, in one or in another way, each one of the political players they pool resources for their own. And I believe this is one of the big problems we have in democracy. And this is it. Because at the very end, in the final comments, I would like to deepen into this, but also based on an idea expressed by someone last Tuesday on the inauguration day. Ahora tengo una pregunta para ustedes.
In the plenary this week and have a question now. Everybody has a... Oh, yes. Welcome. Microphone.
Sí, más que una pregunta, quiero ahondar en lo que dijo la licenciada Claudia.
To what Claudia and what Mrs. Estrada said. Yesterday, we went to the Tecnológico de Monterrey, and my thinking before arriving to the place, I thought I was going to be no less than 500 students listening to the forum. What am I saying this? I was expecting 500 at least students, 500 students. And it is because of what these two ladies just said. What do electoral bodies need to make new citizens? Training, education. In my country, in Panama, we have a saying, we have a thinking, we have a thought, and we say that gold. The old parrots will not bring results. What do I mean by this? All these direct democracy mechanisms which are included in the Constitution and in the law, in our case, as adult citizens, We are already enrolled and participate in organizations and in political parties. And if we could only make more new citizens, if we could organize training, if we could train people from the lowest level all the way to the highest level, this is when we're going to get excellent results in the near future, because since they are children, we're going to teach them that once you become an adult and you're going to cast your vote, you will also count on mechanisms. And if those citizens you have elected to represent you, if you elected them as representatives, and if they do not honor the promises, you have mechanisms and you have the right to ask for a participative budget for your community. The only way to make it happen is going from the lowest to the highest level, and this is why I commend Mrs. Estrada and Claudia, because I believe this is precisely where we have the key to what we're speaking about. Congratulations to both of you. Muchas gracias. No nos queda mucho tiempo.
To you, all of you, what makes you most happy in your job?
Gracias, Bruno. Híjole, hay días en que mucho, porque el compromiso es muy alto. Sinceramente no estaríamos aquí sentadas y sentados si no creyéramos día a día en lo que hacemos.
Every day in what we do and the meaning of the transformation of the citizenship. And it is not having the solution to every problem, but I do believe we have a positive influence as electoral authorities in all this that we call civic education and in the creation of new citizens. It is a difficult challenge sometimes. It is difficult. You know that in Mexico City and in Mexico, we are not having such a good time at this moment because of the reconfiguration made to the electoral system. But this is a challenge we always want to overcome, and this is why we're always getting prepared for. Now, direct democracy, and this is going to be my closing remark, Bruno. How are we doing in terms of participation? Unfortunately, we do not have good news. And those spontaneous exercises by citizens and initiatives whenever there is a specific problem. I remember that experience of the Chapultepec corridor, almost 500,000 people who wanted to participate in the consultation to know whether or not their surroundings was going to be affected, the place where they lived, to create a chains of shops. Only 5% of the people voted. Only 5% of those who were allowed to vote, despite of the work. Look, your life is going to be modified. You will not be able to park where you normally park your car, and the place where you normally walk by. This place is going to be affected because now there are going to be lots of people because of the commercial corridor. Only 5% participative budget exercise. It's been 11 years doing this in Mexico City. Only in average 50% of the people participate, only 5%. So what matters the most is to continue with the exercises. We should not quit. And there are some government says, oh, if only this number of people participate, why don't we remove it and let's use other mechanisms? This is not the formula or the solution. We need to keep doing this, the same mechanisms. This is the only way opportunity we have to have new citizens, and we need to make people get used to the exercise the rights, enforce the rights. Let's do not say it as an obligation or as a burden. Thank you very much. Gracias. In this last part, I would like to answer this question: what do you need as electoral bodies to facilitate direct democracy, an electoral system, and an electoral firm, transparent, independent electoral body? I would like that in Paraguay we are coming out of the ashes. We had a huge tragedy, machines and devices, and one friend was lost, and everything was set on fire. Everything burned, and despite of that, we have a very clear system. This is what we did in the primaries. On January the 18th in Paraguay, we have secret vote, an electronic vote. We have used with very good level of success all these voting machines. I am not saying that it is better than the Brazilian system, but we call them voting machines, and because we can store, there is no a risk of hacking, and there is no online transmission and a public scrutiny, and the jewel, which is the transmission, the fast results. Once the scrutiny is completed, those results are transmitted via CTX to a central we have. And the example that I want to share with you, and the good news, is that in the primary elections, the electoral stations were closed at 1700 hours, and before 2000 hours, we already had the irreversible results. Two runners of the Colorado political party, one of the largest political parties in our country, and they recognized the results of the elections, and at 2000 hours or 8 p.m. we were at ease. We had the results, and it brought peace, it brought easiness, tranquility, and this good sensation to citizens. And all this work was possible thanks to the commitment of the officers we have at the institution. It is amazing to see every weekend, days off, people working even despite of the temperatures, and they are working there, and they give everything in favor of the institution and in favor of democracy. I would like to honor them in this event. And I also would like to say that it has taken us to a high level of credibility by the citizens. This is what we need, and this is what we're still strengthening. And what we can also speak about here is that we're doing a very interesting effort with a training school for women leaders, inclusion, gender equality as well in the political system, inclusion of our brothers and sisters from the indigenous communities, and people, brothers, and sisters, I believe, over 50 or 60 years of age without their IDs or cédula. This is very emotional, and inclusion of youth. We want to reach the highest levels of participation, and then we want with the results to have legitimate results and legitimacy given to all the authorities that get elected. And we want to have very clear, transparent electoral processes, and we want to become what the Constitution says, as the keepers of the people's will. This is what we are looking for in Paraguay, and we are collecting the experiences of the different countries here, and this is very useful to all of us. And we are also want to share technology, knowledge. We have an exceptional technical team from the technical perspective and from the personal perspective, and with Dr. Jaime Betan and with Dr. Cesar Rosell, we are building, we are taking care of this democracy that has taken us that much, the life of our nationals, blood and sweat, and this is something very, very important, and the experience we get from here is going to be very important for our country. Muchísimas gracias. Muy bonitas palabras de felicidad.
Thank you very much. My best, most wonderful time in the job has been my ability, because I was chair of 2 different commissions, to speak up publicly about the problems. And particularly in California, it had to do with money in politics, $6 million that came for a direct democracy initiative from nobody knew who it was from, and I ended up stopping them and taking them to court, and they had to pay $1 million to the state for having done that. And afterwards, at the Federal Election Commission, which is what I call one of the United States' most dysfunctional commissions, because it is very partisan, and it's hard to get things done to have fair, free information to the public so that they know about who's trying to influence their votes. And because I've did all of that publicly, well, I'm in a book, I have in a movie, and people know about it now. They did not know about it. And that's what makes me happiest, because it mobilized a lot of people in the country.
Thank you, thank you. Néstor?
Bueno, ante la pregunta, yo me quito el
To your
sombrero.
question, I would like to take my chapeau as an electoral authority, because what makes me happy is to come every day and to find a great work team at the Monitoring and Digital Monitoring Center. Study and digital monitoring, because today I'm here and I am the one speaking about democracy, but those young people who are there, they are the ones who know about social media. They know about communications, they know about political marketing, they know about design, and they do fabulous things. So I invite you to please follow the Panama social media at T Panama. And I would like to make some final comments. And this is my very candid, honest answer. And I hope they are watching me through the live transmission. And I will lifetime transmission. What I would like to say about democracy is that democracy is a political system, the smartest political system that exists, democracy. And this is why, in my second turn, I spoke about what someone said last Tuesday, that maybe we should eliminate a D from democracy, because there are many facets, representative, direct, and representative, but at the end of the day, it is part of an everything, of a whole. And personally, I believe the democratic we need to have more collective intelligence, and this is why I spoke about Nolan. I said that we're pulling our efforts to the most convenient side for us, because we are not having collective intelligence as a society. And this individualistic collectivism, to me, is what is not allowing democracy to play the role it should play, for which it was created as a system. And I believe this is where, as a society, we have this democratic confusion, because today we are discussing here, we're speaking about direct democracy, and there are going to be points in favor, there are going to be points against. But as a society, going beyond our education and being electoral authorities, or as a society, we are not getting what democracy is all about, and we'll only look at it as a way to solve things, resolve things like this. And this is not what democracy is all about. Democracy is a much more complex system, and due to its complexity, it would never allow easy solutions. This is it. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. Y Claudia, probablemente no sea la institución más feliz del mundo.
After all, so tell us.
Gracias, Anne. Gracias, Bruno. A ver, ¿qué me hace más feliz?
What makes me happiest? Well, the truth is that I am convinced that what makes me happiest in my job is to be able to help through service. I am a conviction-based public servant. I love to serve others. But transforming through institutions and to have the possibility to make public policies that will have an impact, some type of impact, so that somehow we can solve something, even if it is something very tiny in terms of social issues and problems. Those who know me, and even more here at the Institute, I can tell you that training, civic training, is my preferred. It is the most beautiful. I have many different areas of expertise, many, all very interesting, but here, civic education, and to have the possibility to tell my bosses, citizens, that I got prepared to serve you, and together we can have an impact in our country. This is what makes me happy about my job. Gracias. Muchísimas gracias.
We're ready to leave. Thank you, Nestor. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Erika. Thank you, Jorge, for these very inspiring messages, these experiences. I really think it's, I mean, to think about what makes us happy in our activities and work is always a lot of energy which gives us for the next steps. Because in spite of all these problems we are facing, a lot of these deficits, there is always a step to be done and always a step we can learn from what we have done before, and especially also why we are gathering at this global forum. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. So now we will stop the live streaming and we'll get some short stories. We stopped the live streaming because not everybody here in this room has it so easy to be online and be seen. So we will now go to the short stories. Thank you very much. Who is taking over?
Okay. Caroline, are you ready?
¿Estamos listos? Yo voy a ir a buscar al doctor Sewayana de Uganda y vamos a dejarle la palabra a este increíble panel que incluye desde La Paz hasta Viena, ¿verdad? Y hasta Kampala.
Ok. A la hora que me indiquen, compañeros. Sí, adelante, por favor.
Are we live?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Joe, for the introduction, and welcome to this very large panel. We have the very challenging task to wrap up a 4-day global forum now in an hour time. Over the past week, we've discussed about extensively about how we can build good democratic institutions, how direct democracy tools work across the world, how participatory democracy works across the world, how we can use it to combat climate change, to give youth a voice, how we can use it to advance human rights. And now we have to bring all of that together, and I'm really happy that you are joining me for that, and sort of come to a conclusion about the future of democracy, the future of direct democracy, resilience of democracy in the 21st century. And because we only have an hour, I'm going to ask each of you to try and keep it as brief as possible and to come to the point as quickly as possible. And so I'm very pleased to welcome, and I'll start on this side, Daniela Ciaffi, who has been studying and practicing participatory processes for over 25 years. She's an architect, a professor of sociology of the city and environment in Turin, and the vice president of the Laboratory for Horizontal City. Welcome. Then we'll move to Casey Bull from the US and Mexico from Healthy Democracy, who is an expert in participatory and deliberative democracy. Welcome very much. Thank you for joining us. Then we have Martin Vaz Mora, who's a human rights expert who has worked extensively on civil and human rights before joining the National Electoral Institute. So we are in your home. Thank you very much for welcoming us. Next, we have Bernardo Valle, who is an expert in electoral law, public finance, and constitutional law and human rights. He knows everything. He joins us from the ESEM, our other partner organization here in Mexico, the Mexico City Electoral Institute. And then we have Erwin Meyer, who's a member of More Democracy Austria and a board member of Democracy International. So he's worked in civil society on topics of direct democracy for a very long time, and he is also an environmental economist. Welcome, Erwin. And then we are still waiting for our final panelists, but I think we will get started. I will start here. I actually have the same opening question for all of you. You all have very different backgrounds and very different expertises, and so I would like to hear from you. If you had to identify one main opportunity for democracy that we are seeing right now, for the future of democracy, to make democracy more resilient and better, what would that be? And I would ask you to try and stick to 2 minutes, and I will give the word first to Daniela.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. Okay, my very quick answer is that the opportunity is to contribute to our democracies. So we are normally speaking about participatory democracy, of course, deliberative democracy and direct democracy and representative democracy. And I would like to add to our vocabulary, our international vocabulary, another possibilities and other opportunities, and this is the contributive democracy. And the next time you will come to Italy, please visit not only the Colosseum, not only the Torre di Pisa, but also 1 or 2 or 3 of the 7,000 pacts of collaboration that are ongoing in 2,060 Italian cities. So this is the opportunity. In Italy, we have an article of our constitutions, and this article is the horizontal subsidiarity principle, saying that you can have an autonomous initiative to contribute, and if it is for the general interest, you can ask the public bodies, so the state, the region, the counties, the metropolitan areas, the municipalities, but also schools, but also hospitals, to help you in your initiative. So, in the contributive democracy, the starting point is the autonomous initiative of citizens to take care of common goods. So this is my very quick answer. Thank you.
Thank you, that sounds really great. And then I'd like to welcome our final panelist, Dr. Livingston Sebanyana, who is a human rights lawyer, the executive director and founder of the Foundation for Human Rights in Uganda, and the UN independent expert on international order. And I would like to pose you the same question. If you had to, and I would ask you to be brief, but if you would have to identify one main opportunity for democracy right now at this moment, for the future of democracy, to make our democracies more resilient, what would it be?
Thank you, Caroline. Of course, one major opportunity we have to enhance democracy across the globe is the digital revolution that we are experiencing right now. Because ideally, world over, people have access to phones, information can move very fast. Social media has made it easier for people to connect across divides. And indeed, that could be an opportunity. But of course, also having a youthful population that we have in many parts of the world is also another opportunity, because they have embraced the digital technology. They know how to make use of the internet, all the different digital platforms, and the messages can pass very quickly from person to person. So I think we need to embrace it. We need to make sure that it's accessible, because that's also another element. For example, in Africa, the internet is still very costly. It's not accessible. We need to make sure that it's affordable, and make and promote it using simple messages. And in so doing, we should be able to enhance democracy across the globe. Thank you.
Casey, what is the main opportunity you see in the world right now?
Wonderful. Thanks so much for the question. Well, in the US, of course, we're facing a massive breakdown in our democratic institutions. And that's not a surprise to anyone, and that's not unique in our political context. But it's exactly in this crisis that we as democracy reformers see a meaningful opportunity to intervene, to create new systems that are deserving of people's trust and buy-in. And we're living in an era of massive experimentation. I mean, just look at all of the opportunities we've seen through this global forum. And so while the work that we do is housed in lottery-selected panels or citizens' assemblies, we truly believe that it's just one tool in a huge toolbox of democratic reforms that are necessary to move forward. Just to close, the polling firm Pew asked US Americans a few years ago whether the political system in the US needed no change, minor change, major change, or complete reform. And 68% of respondents said either major change or complete reform. That's over 2/3 of the population asking for new systems. If we look at that in the most positive way, we can see that it's a massive opening, a massive opportunity to think seriously about structural change. And if we look at it less positively, well, if we care about democracy in any form, we cannot afford not to think structurally about change.
Thank you very much. Martin, I would pass the same question to you. Maybe, Casey, could you?
Hello, thank you, and welcome. It is an honor to have you here in this place, not only as a country, but here specifically at the National Electoral Institute. Which are some of the opportunities? I believe something very important is to have the possibility of finding a framework of rules and of standards, very precise rules and rules for the organization of all these mechanisms so that there is no tampering of them. We don't want to have tampering by government. We want these mechanisms to be used. We don't want this to be used as a resource for popularity from government or for government, and we don't want this to be used as a resource to weaken democracy itself. And specific for the region, for Mexico and for Latin America, and I believe that Africa could also be subject when we have networks of macro crime. So it is important to have very precise standards and frameworks so that the democracy, direct democracy mechanisms are not used for this, from this perspective or like this. Another very important element as an opportunity, I agree with the fact of all this digital revolution, mechanisms of direct participation. It is not enough to have the participation of lots of people. We have even seen the percentage of participation, at least in Mexico. This is very low, and in other places the same happens. And it is important for these mechanisms to have a social impact in the lives of people, and we don't want these mechanisms to be effective. If not, citizens will not want to be willing to participate in this type of an event. If there is no modification, if there are no changes made to the concrete elements of the lives of people, and when, for example, the results are not effective. So if we could only have a clear, well-established framework of rules so that there is no tampering of all these mechanisms, so that we can actually be able to strengthen democracy in its widest scope, this is an opportunity. This is something we need to look for, and from the perspective of the electoral institutions, this is how we try to participate in this type of mechanisms. We try to promote them, and we want them to be operational, fully operational. That would be it. Muchas gracias. Le damos la palabra a Bernardo, por favor. Thank you. Thanks, Caroline. Thanks a lot for this question. And what I would like to say is that I believe it is very important to have instruments of direct and participative, sound direct and participative democracy elements. But according to what we have discussed so far, I believe in every table, in every session we discussed this. We spoke about the situation of current democracy. So to me, one of the aspects we need to take into consideration this moment undoubtedly is the representative democracy. I cannot conceive direct democracy instruments or participative democracy instruments working correctly in an authoritarian state. This is why, undoubtedly, I believe the opportunity is there, and we have to strengthen representative democracy, and we need to make sure it will represent, and it represents the majorities, with respect to the minorities as well. And for that, I believe three are very important elements. First, to have electoral institutions and sound judicial authorities. We need to have also an active citizenship that limits political control through democracy, direct democracy instruments. And last but not least, we need to have education and training processes with culture, education, and entertainment all play a very important role to build this citizenship. Por último, Erin, la misma pregunta.
Yeah, as you introduced me as an economist, I try to use economic words now. We're in big in danger of losing democracy at all. We have heard a lot about new autocracies coming up, etc. So my main statement would be that the democracies that are still existing should invest in people. And what does it mean, invest in people? That means giving away power they have to the people. It means we need really strong decision-making processes by the people, direct democracy, and participatory instruments, including sortition. But in the end, the people always should have the final say and on everything that can be decided by the politicians. I felt in the last years in many discussions that even parliamentarian and liberal democracy leaders are fearing direct democracy and participatory instruments. They see the people a little bit as opponents, like the opposition or something like that. And that's the main problem. To my mind, they should be in an alliance with the people. And if the power is decentralized and the people have real decision and have really the last words, they would be in alliance with the parliaments, with the government, and then they can define it against internal and external enemies. Because the next demagogue or opportunist or dictator is always around the corner.
A stark warning, and from that I'd like to put a question now to Casey. You've mentioned experimentation, and we're hearing, yes, people, there's also this fear of democracy, this fear of letting people participate more. And so my question to you is, can more participation, can direct democracy, can it also be a weakness? Can it stop us from moving forward?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Carolyn. Actually, change my notes. Great. Yeah, thanks for that question, Carolyn. So something Matt Leininger actually said yesterday was, it really stuck with me, and it's the ask for, or the opportunity that's presented by, right now there are many avenues for deliberation without power, or there's also many avenues for power without deliberation. And we hear from our colleagues on the panel here and ask for having an established framework and working with representative democracy as well. And we think that there is really an opportunity to overlay deliberation with direct democracy avenues right now. So for example, we've heard so much about the initiative system. Well, what if we could foundationally change the initiative system to change some of the flaws that exist in it now? We hear, give the power back to the people. And yes, let's do that, but let's do that through a structured framework that makes it more accessible to all people and with mechanisms for robust information. And then go all the way to give those people the opportunity, everyday folks, to write law that goes to the ballot. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, when we're talking about framework, we're talking about good institutions. I have to look at our colleagues over there from the electoral institutions, and so I would like to ask Bernardo the same question. So, within the framework that we have on the local level, within the institutions that we have, is it possible to let people participate more? Is it an opportunity, or can it also be a little bit of a provocative question? Can it be a danger, as is sometimes said by the opponents of democracy?
Gracias, Caroline. Como señalaba yo hace un
I said a while ago in my first presentation, when I was speaking about 3 elements in that regard, undoubtedly direct democracy is fundamental for the consolidation of the democratic system. And it is very important for citizens and for people to take the plazas, to participate in the decision-making process. And despite of the difficulty of participation in these instruments in Mexico City, we have organized something such as a plebiscite in the year 2002. Participation in these instruments is not the one we want, but we need to look for a way. We need to look for a way to have better participation, and to me, the key has to do with communications of people. It has to do with the information that our authorities give. It also has to do with access given to who is promoting the instrument and all the people who have to intervene in order to increase participation. Because as I have said before, at this moment, it is very, very important to make citizens participate. This is what matters the most. Muchas gracias. Ahora vámonos con Daniela, quien es especialista en la democracia local.
Cities, really, with the help of citizens. And so Bernardo said, you know, difficulty is getting the right information. And so you were talking about this horizontal subsidiarity and these partnerships. Could you explain a little bit more how these partnerships help inform citizens to participate better?
Yeah, thank you for this question. So the architecture is that we have this principle of horizontal subsidiarity, saying what I said before, and this is very, strict connected with the issue of alliances. But alliances, as we know, can be vertical or horizontal, and this, I think, is the jump in the new era of participation. Because I think that most of us know the so-called ladder of citizen participation designed by Sherry Arnstein half a century ago. So the question is, okay, participation is a good idea if it's not manipulation and it is not only information, etc. So what's the difference between now and 50 years ago? And Sherry Arnstein, for Sherry Arnstein, the top of this ladder of citizen participation was power to the people, exactly as John Lennon singing, etc. But the example was the black community in the Bronx allowed to use a budget to regenerate public spaces, okay? Whilst I think that in Italy, we are a very large laboratory of horizontal subsidiarity, because in the example of New York City, it's not the measure of New York City allowing the black community to participate, but the black community, for example, also an informal group of mothers in the Bronx, taking the autonomous initiative to take care of these green areas, for example, of the neighborhood, and asking to the measure, not exactly to the measure, but to the technician working with the measure, to take care together of this common good. And this is a big difference, because we normally speak about participation as involvement of people, but people have got enormous capacities, and you have only to ask people in the Italian model, designed by the Laboratory for Subsidiarity. You only have to say to the measure, just to make one very open answer to your citizens. And the answer is, would you like to contribute to take care of common goods? And this is a very open question. And this is the secret of the, the engagement, the communities in action. And when a community is in action on an issue that the community feels very, very strong and core, then the planning policies normally follow the issue and the way of making an horizontal alliance. So the secret is to have the municipality, not only the politician part, but the technician responsible. And me, just as Daniela Ciaffi, okay? Or you just only as Caroline, okay? The informal groups of citizens, informal groups, okay? Then the association, of course, then the private sector, then, who would like to contribute and how? And so I have translated, not me, but in our subsidiarity, we have translated this regulation that at the local level municipality can adopt to make this very open question. So I have the English and the Spanish version, and I'm happy to share it with you. And to really think in all your countries if it is a possible model of contributive democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. And when we're talking about autonomous initiatives and these sort of bottom-up movements to save the common goods, you spoke now about a local example, but I have to think about a global example. I think about climate change. Climate change is obviously one of the big challenges that we face as humanity in the coming years and that we have faced. So I would go to our climate change expert all the way on the other side and ask him, can citizens be trusted to save the climate?
I would go further than that, more than trust. To my mind, it's the only way. I see such a big challenge in climate change, and I'm a little bit between two chairs always sitting. It means talking to politicians and reality and realistic arguments. And on the same side, I'm in strong contact with IPCC scientists, etc. And what they are telling me is we have a reduction curve like that. It means 10, 15% each year. And a carbon budget for maybe 10 or 15 years. And on the realistic side, you have cars on the street, you have factories running, etc. So this dramatic change of the whole society, to my mind, can only be decided by the people themselves. So we have to explain them how dangerous the situation is really, so that they can understand it, and to discuss the solutions with them. Carbon pricing, forbidding internal combustion engines, etc., etc. All the heavy instruments and hard decisions. We have to discuss it with the people, and only then it is, to my mind, available to reach 1.5 degrees Celsius to limit global warming. If it is up to governments and parliaments, for me it's very, very clear that we will never reach 1.5 degrees Celsius. So it's not only trusting, it's the only hope I have, that we have a combination of sedition formats like climate assemblies, but, and that's the main but, in the end there must be the decision by the people. This is maybe also I want to add to my former colleague to the statement. The horizontal alliance needs decision-making by both on the same level. That's very important, because the OECD is talking about a so-called deliberative wave going around. And I can see this really in all countries. There are more and more, and I would say inflationary formats of deliberative processes and participation processes. Nice to have a talk, nice to hear to each other. But in the end, they go away, and the politicians in parliament and government decide as they always had, and they are under very strong influence of special interests, especially of the fossil fuel industry. This hasn't changed the last decade, so the only hope is for climate change that we have this alliance with the people, and the final word on instruments and everything is up to the people.
Thank you very much for that. I would like to go now to our UN independent expert, because when we talk about the global level, when we talk about climate change, we talk about decision making at the UN level, at the global level. And so I would like to ask you specifically, are there opportunities for citizens to get involved on a global level in decision making? Is this something that we will see in the future? Is this something that is possible?
Sounds exciting. One thing we need to bear in mind is that there has been a lot of information generated, best practices generated across the world. The biggest challenge we face is that we are not sharing this information. Just last month, I think it was last month, in Doha, the discussion was on climate change. The Doha Declaration tells you very clearly at every level how to deal with the question of climate change. For example, Qatar in particular shared best practices on how they have been able to reduce carbon emissions. So these experiences need to be translated at the local level. This information needs to be brought to the lowest level, and that requires North-South partnership. And that's critical. We also need to bear in mind that there are systems, there are standards, there are measures that have been adopted at the international level that need to be disseminated at the lowest level. And that calls for democracy activists like us, for example, to be key in ensuring that we open these spaces, broaden these spaces. How? We need to understand, for example, how the UN system works and what opportunities it offers. For example, some of the societies we are talking about are closed. We may be talking about enhancing participation. Some societies cannot participate. They're under military dictatorship. When you talk about values, standards, it doesn't mean anything to that person. So what do you need? We need to open up these societies. And how do we do that? For example, the special procedures mechanism to which I belong is one mechanism through which you can open spaces by calling for invitation to a particular country of special rapporteurs and independent experts to dialogue with the governments on how best to transform these standards to the advantage of the local people. So we need to customize this information. We need to break the barriers. We need to simplify the messages. We need to ensure that information generated at a particular level goes to the other one. And I think an opportunity we have with this global forum is that we are generating, we are networking, we are sharing experiences, best practice. These need to find room to the lowest level. And that, for me, would be the answer to your question.
Thank you very much. I would like to move then to Martin Faz, because we are here in the National Electoral Institute, an institution that has a lot of experience also working together with citizens and making sure that this information finds its way to citizens. So my question to you would be, how does this interplay between institutions and citizens work? How do we make sure that we have well-informed citizens? How do we make sure that citizens are enabled to participate in democracy in the best way possible?
Well, a very important element is that institutions, in this case electoral institutions, should establish an ongoing social communications policy. And in the case of Mexico, at least, we had the advantage, at least until now, we have the advantage of having spaces. We have spaces in radio and in television in a way that through a communications policy, well-defined communications policy, we can give information to the citizens. I believe this is very important. It is very, very important to use these types of tools as public institutions we have. We should also have a very clear and established regulatory framework, because it should not only be a given away or something given for free by governments. I know that there are some electoral institutions have it, not all of them, but it is very important to have spaces dedicated to communications. And another very important element, at least in the case of the Electoral National Institute, is the national strategy of civic culture. It is a public policy, and it has been drafted by the Institute, and it was created by the Institute to overcome one of the weaknesses in our citizens' culture, and which is a weakness of the citizens' culture. And through this strategy, we can organize activities together with entrepreneurial institutions. We work together with the civil society and, of course, with government, so that we can establish this whole strategy, a theme-specific strategy that would also allow us to do a very wide communications effort of the different public matters, to then take this discussion to the public life of people. And we want the society to also go to the public plaza, for example, because one of the elements is to demand from authorities. So I believe that with a well-conducted social communications policy, talking to citizens, and with this civic culture strategies well implemented, this is how we can share the information. And even more, for example, when we have a direct participation mechanism that we have to promote, advertise, we should also have the communication strategy, because a very important element in every type of direct democracy mechanism, as well as in every electoral process, but speaking about direct democracy mechanisms, is that we should have a well-informed participation, and this is precisely where we play a very important role.
And we are running out of time, so I'm going to ask my final question, and it's the same for all of you. So we've talked now for 4 days. You've spoken with people from all over the world. You bring your own experience, and I would like to look forward to the future of democracy, to democracy in the 21st century, and I would like us to do that in a hopeful way. So I'm asking all of you to tell me about the most hopeful example that most hopeful sign that you have seen that democracy can work. There's some experience that you've had that shows that there is a way forward for democracy, and that there is positive development. And maybe I'll start all the way in the back with Erwin.
Okay, again, as always with climate, because what I said before was the reason when I came back from Ireland, I wanted to have a citizens' assembly on climate issues in Austria, because it was also in Ireland, and to combine it with a referendum, like it was in Canada before, on electoral reforms, etc. And in Oregon, I know all those examples. And I came back and I made a coalition together with Fridays for Future and Extinction Rebellions and other. And then I came to the ministries and to the politicians and said, we need a climate assembly. No, they didn't. We are very skeptical about the people, if they can be informed and decide on such topics and if this makes sense. Then there was the so-called Klimavolksbegehren. There's a people initiative in Austria, and they took up this demand after very long and hard discussions before they rejected it, but then they took it up. And in the end, and I make it short, it was decided in the parliament that we should have one, because of also a green friend of mine who supported it. And the Climate Assembly, and this makes me hopeful now, that was your question, showed that the people are ready to engage. They are ready to have a deliberative process on the same level. They preferred it. For the first time in their life, they can speak up on a political topic and to be on the same level as all the others. They like to be informed by scientists, and they like that this Climate Assembly is a huge translation format. That means political speech and law speech and IPCC science speech has to be translated to ordinary people, to bus drivers, etc., in this Climate Assembly. And after all, the recommendations showed that they have been more ambitious, and all the climate assemblies in the world have shown that they are more ambitious than parliaments and governments. Second, it showed it was always a social outcome, so the distributional effects have been very fair of this assembly, and that they are ready to do something to support it. But, there's always a big but, at the end, the same politicians that made the climate assemblies did not like my idea on a binding referendum, and therefore it was not linked to a binding referendum. And it's now 8 or 9 months ago, because it was in June last year, the recommendations, and I closely watch what is happening in the climate policy in Austria. That's my job. Nothing. Not one recommendation of this climate assembly was implemented. So not 1 kilogram of CO2 has changed just because of this climate assembly. So there has to be, again, this link to a binding referendum.
Thank you. Bernardo Valle, I would ask you the same question. What is the most hopeful sign you've seen regarding democracy in recent times?
Con mucho gusto, Caroline.
Very my pleasure, Caroline. I would like to tell you that it was difficult for me to find, it was kind of difficult to find the most hopeful sign. I had two possibilities. One was the mechanisms we have for the participative budgetary efforts, because here we have lots of social fabric in it, but I believe undoubtedly the one that I believe is even more hopeful, and the one we have in Mexico City. It comes from a chapter we have in the Constitution of Mexico City, the one passed in 2017. It establishes the obligation of authorities to guarantee the observation of children. In the case of children and youth, this was a challenge. This was a challenge for the institution in Mexico City to guarantee this observation. We designed a digital platform ex-professor, digital platform to follow up the electoral process. This was a platform where we invited children to produce material, to review the material we were producing, and I believe this was a platform. That platform was a big success in the 2018 electoral process. Let me tell you that it was the most observed observation platform. We had the support of the political parties, and we also have other non-political party runners, and they sent their proposals with the adequate language for children, and all this material was incorporated, was included, and all the candidates runners to be the city mayor, they accepted to participate in interviews, and they accepted to have a type of debate with children. And it was also visualized. It was seen significantly. So I believe this is a tool that is helping build citizens, well-informed citizens. And I believe it is hopeful to see that as a result of this platform that we have at this institution or in the institution, this is how we are helping Mexico City to have children and youth that in the future are going to be very well prepared for democracy. That's it. Thank you very much. Pude ver ese voto a principios de este
to see the children participate in this project here in Mexico City. So Martin Faz, I would pass the same question to you. What is the most hopeful thing we are witnessing today regarding to democracy?
Bueno, hablas de un ejemplo más esperanzador. Voy a ponerme optimista, espero. Bueno, yo diría que un ejemplo esperanzador de que la democracia funciona es que sí puede la
democracy works is that democracy can actually dismantle authoritarian systems. And I believe the Mexican example is one. In other words, in the last 3 decades, we've seen that with the creation of a legal framework of electoral institutions, it was possible to come out of a model authoritarian system, very specific, very particular one, because it was not a dictatorship as such. But we all know the name given to this mechanism, the perfect dictatorship. But yes, it is possible. When a regulatory framework is created, when institutions are created through democracy, it is possible to dismantle authoritarian systems. And this is hopeful. We have to, however, we need to know how to limit our hope, because it could also be reversible, and it could be reversed through democratic mechanisms. Since you ask for a hopeful case, I will tell you that it is, with democracy, it is possible to dismantle democratic systems. But we know we could also have steps back, but we need to bet on this actual possibility. And I do trust, I am certain that democracy could continue, might continue, as long as authoritarian systems are dismantled, and not to allow them to be back. And it will be possible as long as we empower citizens, and direct democracy mechanisms are fundamental for this.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, Casey, go ahead.
Wonderful, and I think I'll just tag right on to the end of what my colleague was saying. When people are given the time, the resources, and the delegated political responsibility to solve our most difficult issues, they step up. But we need systems to support this at a foundational level. And ideally, we need those to be permanent fixtures of our democratic institutions. We are particularly inspired right now at Healthy Democracy by city-level examples. We've just finished one of the biggest, or one of the most innovative lottery-selected assemblies in the US, and it was in a town of only 60,000 people. But cities and regions can do as much, to speak to Livingstone's point, cities and regions can do as much, or maybe even more, because they often come with more flexibility and innovation and more feasibility for structural change. One of our other favorite examples at the moment concerning democracy and participation is a groundbreaking new lottery-selected panel. It's kind of like a city council that has just been adopted in Paris, France. It has the power to entirely define its own agenda, to commission additional lottery-selected assemblies to do work on its behalf, and then to take those bills directly to the city council itself. So while there's no integration with direct democracy, it has just about as much power as one could think to give it, other than being able to put things directly on the ballot. And so to drive this point home, and to your point, Erwin, imagine what a system could do if it did have access to the ballot. Like how it could start to put pressure on representative bodies to be more responsive, more internally deliberative and inclusive. And it might model a form of self-governance that's radically more collaborative at its core, that could seep up through our traditional engagement systems or governmental systems and down into our workplace and everyday life. Thank you.
Thank you. Livingston, please, we'd like to hear a hopeful message about democracy before we all go back into the world.
One example to attest to the fact that democracy works. You recall on day one, I spoke about the wind of change that blew across Africa in the 1990s. In Africa, most of governments were autocratic. People were in power for years and years. It was almost monarchical. Indeed, there was no hope that you can change government. When the wind of change blew and democracy prevailed, we saw constitutional reforms taking place. And with reference to my region, the East African region, we saw constitutions being made, people demanding for more representation, people demanding for a say in how they are governed. Today, as I speak, in all the constitutions in the East African region, they make provision for power, that power belongs to the people. That is number one. Actually, in the Ugandan Constitution, Article 1 says power belongs to the people. Since then, we hold elections, we have electoral bodies, and there's provision for interest groups, women, children, disabled. Actually, in our parliament, the Ugandan parliament, 50% of the representation are women. There is also a provision which requires that there's 2/3 representation of women across the entire governing structure, right from the local district level. Indeed, it shows that when there is direct democracy, there is democracy, things can actually change. Indeed, as I speak now, most of the countries in that region have had change of governments. Recently, Kenya elected, Tanzania has elected. But of course, let's also be mindful that we also experience democratic reversals, like in Uganda, with the exception of Uganda, whose government has been in power for the last 35 years. The rest of the governments in the region are changing. It's also possible that ours will also change. With the democracy, our dreams come true.
Thank you very much.
It's difficult to speak after you.
You can do it.
I try to. Okay, so I think that also in these days, the effort is really to think and active listening other ideas. I think that everybody is obsessed by his, keywords. I'm obsessed by horizontal subsidiarity, for example. And the effort we have to do, because we are very lucky, but we also have to be accountable to our work team and communities, etc., and countries, I think, is to build a bridge. I think that we have to become, active listening examples. And in this direction, for example, I think that in Italy, in 2011, we got a referendum, very interesting, because it was about the water, not as a public service, but as a common good. And this is a very, very strong bridge that I think that with people interested in direct democracy, we can really work on. And another bridge is with all these people working on participatory budgeting, because in Italy we can see that after a cycle of participatory budgeting, there is the problem of who manage this neighborhood area or other issues. And then comes the pact of collaboration, okay, to build this horizontal alliance to co-manage, always open to other people that would like to join. I give you a last very direct example of the difference between public services and common goods. Think to a school. A school as a public service, open to 8 and in Italy close to 4 p.m. But many schools in Italy now open at 4 p.m. and stay open until 10 p.m. in the evening, becoming common goods. So open to all these activities and agreements that the school as public service can do with people active in the neighborhood. So please, after today, think always to when a public service is and stay public services, and when it is moving in the direction of common goods, open to all, etc. So I think that we are really recognizing more and more, also in these days, speaking with you, and thank you for these dialogues, in an era of hybridization of public services. And I think it's okay. It will be very difficult, but I trust in our capacities. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you all very much for these very interesting inputs and for helping us wrap up this forum and all of these different topics. I have learned that the future of democracy is green, it is young, it is empowered citizens, it's inclusive, and it means that democracy is a common good. So thank you very much for that. And then I would like to welcome onto the stage after this panel Itzel Riba, who is really the engine behind the Global Forum here in Mexico. Without her, we wouldn't have these beautiful spaces where we've met. We wouldn't have this amazing concept. We wouldn't have the whole Global Forum fabric here in Mexico is thanks to her. And so I'd like to welcome her onto the stage to read the Global Forum Declaration.
Hello. So we drafted this. It's a 2-page declarations reading. It's open for any suggestions that you may want to add afterwards. You can send them to us. We can make this a bit more brief and dynamic. So here it is. If I mess up something in English, I'm sorry. But we're trying our best. This is a concluding statement of the 11th Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy 2023, held this week in Mexico, which was drafted by the event hosts. As in every edition of the Global Forum, a summary of the discussions is presented and our shared intentions as a community part of this great event are declared. Just last Sunday, many of you witnessed a massive protest in the largest city in the Western Hemisphere, which is part of a fervor about the role and form that electoral institutions should have in Mexico City, Mexico in general. The former accounts of the importance The former accounts of the importance of citizen involvement in discussions about public space, citizen participation, and democratic institutions. People from over 60 countries from all continents have gathered this week in Mexico City, Guadalajara, and Mérida to share experiences, knowledge, and ideas with people who are very different from us, but who share the conviction to strengthen democracy in the world. We cannot deny the democratic erosion that the world is experiencing at this moment. However, there are also increasingly more processes that seek to bring citizens closer to everyday decision-making. This forum allows us to see the great differences between the challenges of African, American, European, North American, and Latin American democracies. How fascinating the difference between the Lucerne Forum and this one, huh? The different forms of democracy in the world can be inspirational and learning references for others. However, each of them must find its own way, achieving common objectives without leaving aside the particularities that enrich us. The foray into these types of mechanisms and tools bring with it lessons and learnings, sometimes costly, but always of great value to continue building and strengthening the power of citizenship. We consider it essential that the beginning of these exercises in Mexico and the rest of Latin America, as well as other emerging democracies, be well directed in the face of the risk of being hijacked to promote partisan agendas and leaders with authoritarian tendencies, thus distorting the spirit of direct democracy and undermining people's participation. In a region where we find the greatest inequalities in the world, democratic exercises provide a level playing field for the voices of all people to be heard, both at the international and transnational levels, as well as the local ones. In particular, direct democracy promotes a scenario in which people's participation is proactive and not just reactive to what the spheres of power decide. Today, more than ever, the discussion of how direct democracy is related to representative democracies in the world is relevant. What should we do when our representative democracies sometimes do everything but represent the everyday people who live in our countries? Liberal democracy is a system that, to a large extent, was built before phenomena such as globalization, misinformation through social networks, social media, among others. In the face of modern phenomena, we need modern institutions that contribute to empowering people, and including groups that have historically been vulnerable. Building civic culture from our different fields through collective intelligence processes and public pedagogy is a meeting point from which we all work to ensure democratic resilience. In this forum, we have differed on various points, giving space for dialogue and listening to build from our differences. But we have also agreed on many others, such as the importance of having strong, independent, and open to citizens institutions. We have recognized the value of each of us and each of the places we come from. This declaration is our letter of reality and hope, which we hope will continue to be nourished by the voices of the people who attended the forum, those who have attended the previous ones, and those who will continue to attend those to come. So your suggestions, corrections, and contributions are more than welcome. And now we're having a few of the participants of this forum giving us their highlights of their experiences during these days. I think there's like 5 people coming to, yes. Hey. Do you want to have a seat? Well, I would stand, but if you want to sit, you can. Yeah, I would make it more like enjoyable. So first, I would like you to quickly introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your highlights in the forum. Super quick, super fun highlights.
Okay, my name is Dion McCurdy. I'm from Australia, and I think the highlights for the forum for me, although I enjoy all the panels and the workshops and the speeches, is probably the coffee breaks and the lunches, because not for the food, not just because coffee is important, but because it's the opportunity for us to get to know each other on a personal level and a professional level.
And what would you take with you from Mexico in your luggage?
Well, I think I recognise to some degree the privilege of the Australian democracy, that there are some things that we do very well, and that it sort of shocks me that there's some things that I'm just so used to and that seem very basic to me are still things that need to be worked on in many countries around the world. And I suppose some resilience, some learning that you know, I've had a personal experience of not quite, let's just say, of failure in my democratic efforts, but that you know, failure is normal, failure is good. You learn from failure, and you have to keep going. And that there have been many examples of people who do not give up and do not accept failure, and then achieve great success. And so I think I take that resilience with me.
Thanks. For a moment there, I thought you were bringing back failure, and I was worried. But I'm glad it was resilience. So, Casey Bull, what was your highlight of the forum?
Great, thanks. Casey Bull, not Direct Democracy, that's the conference, Healthy Democracy, based in Oregon, but I'm actually lucky enough to live here in Mexico, in La Paz, Baja California Sur. My favorite thing about this conference was just making connections. I'm kind of re-entering this world after a long time and getting to hear such inspiring stories from around the world and make connections with people who are doing great work. Yeah, was my favorite part.
And if you could take something from the forum or from Mexico in your suitcase, what would it be?
In my suitcase? Well, my suitcases aren't leaving Mexico, but I'll try to think ahead to the future. In my suitcase, a lot of materials. I've been gifted so many books, so many pamphlets about different ways of doing this across the world. So that's what's going to be in my suitcase.
Thanks. Hey, so could you introduce really quick yourself, where you're from, and your highlight of the forum?
Thanks. Hello, everyone. My name is Diana Daher. I am the head of citizen participation at Fundación Corona in Colombia, and I will highlight the value of collaboration. Something that I have learned in this conference and lived is the power when people come together and collaborate to build a stronger democracy. So I think that's my highlight, and I'm so happy and grateful for being able to be here and share with all of you.
So I'm about to change the question a bit. So what can you take from here, but if you were to come back, what would you bring to the next one?
More people. Yeah. No, I think that the more the merrier, and there's so many amazing examples here, and people sharing what they're doing, and the value of the shared strength of INE, for instance, and all the complex situations. So I think that coming here, it's an experience that fills you with energy, so the more the merrier. Hopefully more people can come.
My name is Maureen Mason, and I'm from Canada. And when I came to this conference, I felt very proud to come from a democratic country like Canada. But after the conversations, I realized we have a very thinly veiled democracy. We have the illusion of inclusion, and we have been very, very lazy in our work to hold our democracy accountable to the people. And I am newly elected, and this conference has given me courage to shine the light in those dark corners. Gracias.
I'm Angelika Gardiner from Germany, and this is about my 10th Global Forum on Modern Direct Democracy. And one might think it's always the same. It's the same general topic, but not two of them have been alike. And every time I come home with a new insights and new courage to touch the things that are still missing in our democracies. And you know, in our part of the world, the classical democracies have been under siege for quite a few years now. And all of us need a lot of knowledge and courage to fight all the hidden dangers. And I was so sorry, yesterday there was one workshop about the silent manipulation by the internet, but it was only in Spanish, no translation into English. And I think this is a topic that should accompany us on the next forums, and I will be there too, and I hope so.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the moderator would say the same.
Hi, my name is Alan. I'm from Mexico. And the lesson that I take is that in order for democracy to survive, in order for democracy to be vital again, a big coalition between governments, EMBs, NGOs, civil society has to be made that puts back the needs of the people in its center. We need to take back into the consideration the need of the ordinary people, and all the people need to see democracy as a tool for their everyday life. And I'm not living Mexico, but what I take from everybody else is their enthusiasm, their freshness, the way they look at democracy, and that I'm very excited to recreate here in Mexico and to bring all the better practices that you have tell about all these days, and we're looking forward to do it here also in Mexico.
Thanks for your experiences. I know there's many more, and I hope they're all as enthusiastic and cheerful as yours. So thanks for having come. We're really glad that everyone's here through the whole, a lot of days program and the days to come. No? So thanks.
Thank you.
Bueno, estamos haciendo un corte a nuestra transmisión en vivo, en lo que realizamos el acomodo para dar paso a la clausura.
The National Electoral Institute cordially welcomes you to the closing ceremony of this Global Forum, Direct Democracy 2023. The chair is Claudia Zavala Perez, chairing this event. The co-chair of the Global Forum of Modern Direct Democracy, Bruno Kaufmann. The electoral counselor, Bernardo Valle Monroy from Mexico City. And the co-chair of the Global Forum of Modern Direct Democracy, Joe Matthews. And in order to start, we're going to give the floor over to Joe Matthews.
I have the impossible task of closing this forum, which never seems to close. It just goes on and on. It's not my job to tell you, we'll be in Merida for 2 days, it's not my job to tell you where it might go after it, and you wouldn't want to give that away with your choice of clothing. You know, that would be kind of cheap. But it's going to be in a very exciting place next year, I'm told. 15 years we've been doing this, and I think this is the last one I have to really organize, right? Right, Bruno? This is the longest, and it's many ways the most challenging, and it's still not over of the forums. We have 2 more days in Merida, and we organize it in a very short time period. Though it is a dream of many, many years, and preparations really began 5 years ago. If you want to know who to thank, because we're not, still thanking people, take a look now at your badge, and on the other side you see, just actually some of the many institutions that made this possible. It's truly remarkable, and thank them. There were many, many beautiful ideas and stories and thoughts and very interesting data presented here, but this was a very sobering week. Lots of sobering conversations. Democracy fundamentally, in English, I think amounts to 4 words: everyday people governing themselves. And the reality of the world we're lived in is, we've seen in contributions from people who live in places as far apart as Tunis and Tegucigalpa, is that to practice democracy is to make yourself a target in this day and age. And we saw this week that even, probably the world's most distinguished electoral body, most sophisticated, and as we all experience today, very generous electoral body, can itself become a target. The good news is that, as we saw here last Sunday, and we've seen throughout this forum, people have rallied behind electoral bodies here. They've rallied behind people all over the world. We need that. We need mutual aid. We see the world when there's a great pandemic, people come from all over to help each other, to rally to find vaccines, or after an earthquake or a terrible flood or a terrible natural disaster. Maybe we need a grand mutual aid, an international Red Cross of democracy to respond. And I think if there were to be such a body, many of the people in this room would have to come together to form it. Speaking of people who give you a boost, my wife and all my 3 sons are here for the first time in my 15 years of doing these global forums. Their names... my boys are named Ben and Tom and Sam. People ask who they are named for. The truth actually is that they're named for family members, both my wife and side, who really suffered from failed governance and a lack of democracy in places like Russia, Northern Ireland, and Oklahoma. But I actually don't always like to, tell the exact truth, and so I prefer to say sometimes that they were named after the 3 founding fathers who could write. Sam Adams, Tom Jefferson, and most of all, Ben Franklin. And of all the many wise things that Ben Franklin said, the one that I think sticks with and lands most profoundly here today is this. In a time of tyranny, when they, the Constitutional Convention, after the new Constitution had been, I'm sorry, I'm misstating myself. After the Declaration of Independence, at a time of great tyranny. I'm tired. A time when tyranny ruled the world, pretty much everyone was a monarch or an autocrat. And he was asked if, about, what the prospects for this, and the famous quote is, "We will all hang together, or we will all hang separately. So, damas y caballeros, let's hang together. Thank you.
A continuación damos la palabra al consejero Bernardo Valle Monroy.
Valle Monroy. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Electoral Institute of Mexico City, I would like to thank Bruno and Joy, who both co-chair the Global Forum for Thinking in Mexico and specifically in Mexico City in order to have this Global Forum. And I would like to say this was, the idea was to have it in the year 2019, and as of that date is when we started to design the strategy, how this was going to be carried out. It implied many, many hours of work. We held weekly meetings at that moment, and then we started to have daily meetings. And I also would like to say that there's no question that all the topics that have been dealt with here in Mexico City, undoubtedly the role of the direct democracy, all this is very important, and in Mexico City these are the topics being discussed, and it is very, very important to have academicians, to have researchers, to have people with very interesting experiences in different parts of the world, to have them here in Mexico to speak about all that. There is no question that their experiences and what they have contributed within this forum gives us the context to those who live here in Mexico so that we can keep strengthening our democratic system. I would like to thank the INE and Professor Zavala and Roberto Heiser and Itzel, because they were the ones who they are the ones who made it possible, who made this global forum possible. And I also would like to thank you all the attendees in this forum. That's it. We kindly ask you to please remember to give your headsets back. This is an announcement organizers asked me to make. And now we're going to give the floor over to Bruno Kaufmann.
Thank you very much. We have been here together for 4 days, but in fact this has been a process of more than 20 years, and you have already seen and heard too much of Joe and me in these years. So I want to give briefly the word to a colleague which we already 20 years ago started the idea of a global forum. It wasn't called the Global Forum, it was the World Conference on Direct Democracy. And we planned that the first time in 2007 in Lucerne, Switzerland. And then after 15 years we managed, or 16 years we managed to do that. And my friend who was been around and working with me for all these years, he became the Itzel of Lucerne. That's Adrian Schmid. Please, up on the floor.
Yes, thank you so very much to co-presidents, the responsible of the INE here in Mexico. This was a really great moment, and I would like to elaborate for this important work everybody you've done here. I think give them a hand. This is an applause of ours for all of them what they've done here. But I have to underline, the success of this global forum is based on the commitment of different people in the background. There were so many people in the background, not in the highlight. And I would like to say a big, great thanks, especially, and I would like to ask you to come to the stage. Itzel, come to the stage. Please. And of course, Caroline. Caroline from Germany, Isel from Mexico. I think that was a beautiful, very important work you've done in the background, and it was really also important to have you here now at this moment on the stage. So, I mean, I don't want to speak too long. I would like to give you some flowers. Look, this is a present from the heart. It's from Corazon, you know? It's from Corazon, okay? So, I go first to Isel. Thank you. Caroline. Thank you. But you know, this is only a symbolic present. I have another gift for the two women. It's a gift from Switzerland. It's a gift from the Swiss Democracy Foundation, and I'm happy to give it to you here. Look at that. Isel, this is an invitation for 3 noches, 3 nights, in a historical hotel in Switzerland, in Suiza. So, 3 nights, okay? And of course, you know, I took 2 different colors, not to make a mistake. This is the voucher for Caroline. It's also 3 noches, 3 nights, in a historical hotel in Switzerland. Give them a big hand. Muchas gracias. But last not least, I would like to thank very much to our partner, the Democracy International, members of the board, of the people, they worked in the background. Andreas Müller, I please you to stand up. All the people worked there. Daniela, all of the members. Okay. So I think, thank you very much. I give the word back.
Thank you very much, and then of course I want to extend this thank you also to all of you and to our partners and colleagues here all over. And at this point, of course, I learn a little bit from being in America, so I also want at this point to thank very much my dear family, my wife Elizabeth and my daughters Vanya and Nina, who have been around for the Global Forum almost for 15 years. Please stand up. Wouldn't have been possible without your participation. So, we are in a situation where democracy as a form of government has become under attack. The more our community of people, organizations, and institutions has grown, have become stronger, better informed, and better equipped. So the question is, why are the foundations of democracy so much under attack? And I would say there are 2 answers. One answer is that we are still too weak. Our democracies are still too exclusive. They are too elitist. They are too paternalistic. At the same time, democracy has become so powerful that the few who hold much more power than others start to get nervous and crazy. Autocratic old men from Tunisia to China, from Mar-a-Lago to the Kremlin. I would just want to say, their time is about to end. Our hours are about to come. Viva la democracia. Gracias.
Bien. Finalmente escucharemos las palabras de la
Not
consejera.
least, we're going to listen to Mrs. Gloria Zavala Perez. Thank you. Good afternoon, as we say here in Mexico. Good afternoon to everyone. It is a pleasure to be here at this moment. And people who have been already recognized, I would like to recognize Roberto and Itzel, and because they've done such a big effort to build this idea. They have worked with Joe, with Bernardo, and with Bruno. It was a collective effort, but we can see the results. Thank you very much. Also to Caroline, she's back there. All those who made this forum possible. I am very touched, moved, and I feel pretty emotional to be in front of you because this is when the hope starts. We are going through difficult times in this democracy. We live not only in Mexico, as you were able to witness, we are living many frontal threats by those groups of power. And then thinking about citizens makes sense. Thinking about our citizens makes even more relevant sense, and we have to work, and we are working with you. It's been twice. I've been working twice in this global direct democracy forum. I am still convinced that working to strengthen citizenship is what is going to save us. This is going to, it will save citizens and all people, children, teenagers, youth, and adults. We will not fall into those temptations by power because that has destroyed nations. So this is a moment of joy for Mexico and for the rest of the world because we are finding, and here we have people who are convinced that power belongs to citizens. Power of, like in democracy, power is the foundation. The foundation is people, all people and citizens, and there's a commitment we make today. Resilience, lots, as we were told from Australia, those voices that just told their stories. And yes, in Mexico and in Latin America and in other countries, we've been pretty resilient. And we're going to be resilient, more resilient. We will continue being resilient. And in this very important point in time for the Constitution, because this is the very first time when it's been attacked, the Constitution has been devastated and attacked despite of the fact that it's a citizens' institution. It has been given results and it has worked for the citizens. And here it makes sense. And here we have many colleagues who work for electoral institutions. And we should take this with us. We should make the commitment to keep working. We need to keep working to build the citizenship we need in order to cope with all these attacks by power. Thanks to all of you who were with us from many different places, more than 90 countries, all gathered here. It makes sense and it is very meaningful. But now it is even more meaningful. This is even more meaningful for those who are in government because this is a very important message. All the ones who are here and those who are in the stream audience. There are citizens for many more things, and we're going to keep building our citizenship so that we can exercise our power. And this is what I take with me from this forum. Thank you very much. This is how we conclude the Global Forum, Direct and Modern Democracy Global Forum 2023. We kindly ask you to please give your headsets back and get your IDs back, which is even more important. Please. The National Electoral Institute thanks members of this table of honor and those who were with us in the different venues and those who are in the stream for their attendance. We kindly ask you to please remember to stay please in your seat.